Welcome to Sports Cards once again. If you watch a lot of YouTube videos teaching about sports card investing, you would likely have come to an understanding that low pop card counts are the best investments you can make in the sports card market. But is that really the case? In this video, I'm going to talk about how this is not necessarily always the case, depending on how you are approaching sports card investment. Many sports card investment gurus express things in a way where it seems like they have really figured everything out. But too often, the reason their approach has worked so well for them is because it fits within an overarching plan that is unique to their situation and may not be universally applicable. I think too many high-end investors who are looking to invest in super expensive, low-printed cards of the GOATs often fall into this category. High-end sports card investing, like a lot of investing out there, can really be a rich man's game. A situation where the richest of the rich get richer and the other 99% of us just can't approach it the same way. The problem here is that these super high-end, short-printed cards have a very limited list of people who can actually afford them. If the economy hits a massive downturn and a certain percentage of those higher-end sports card investors decide to shift their investment strategy in a different direction so as to own, say, property instead of slabs of cardboard, those higher-end priced cards may have trouble finding a buyer. The market for cards that are extremely expensive is already populated by a pretty small population, so that even an exodus of a relatively small number of people could be catastrophic in that market for those upper-tier cards. To me, that doesn't seem like the safe place to go when considering investment. Now, that being said, I never like to just say one side of a perspective, because there is another perspective to consider here. Looking through past economic downturns, it is rarely ever the super wealthy who are affected much. Just looking through what happened economically during this whole pandemic fiasco is a good example. Many of the world's richest people managed to make themselves richer than ever before, while the economic prospects for many others was more dire than ever before. Now, if you consider it objectively, the economic systems of the world are really set up to benefit the richest among us. If you look at history over the past few generations, you can see a constant trend of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, to such a degree that it's completely ridiculous, to be honest. YouTube it if you don't get it. The statistics are staggering. With that in mind, there is something to be said about investing in the highest of the most expensive possible cards. This perspective is kind of a cynical one though, because it's basically saying that even in the worst of times, if the global market economy was to basically collapse, the ultra wealthy would still be investing in super high-end sports cards. Now, I don't doubt that they could, but I just don't find myself being cynical enough to think that that's what would happen. But anyway, I'm going into some crazy speculation here, so let's pull this conversation back to the present reality a bit more. The main idea I'm trying to express here is that the super high-end sports cards are really only attainable for the super rich. If for any reason many of these people move away from the sports card hobby, you may end up stuck with a card worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that can't find a buyer. That'd be terrible. On the other hand, if you invest in cards that are more liquid in nature and that are more attainable for the more mid-tier collector investor, I think you're actually likely to be safer. Cards that are very low printed, if over a long period of time they basically never show up on the market, eventually they may also fade from collectors' collective consciousness, thereby killing any real demand for that card. If that's combined with a number of wealthier collectors eventually leaving the hobby at some point for some reason, those rare cards could end up being really bad long-term holds. On the other hand, if the card could be found here and there at least semi-regularly, it stays on everyone's minds. It seems attainable to most, and the idea of it germinates in the minds of collectors. It will likely have a buyer. That seems like a better investment to me. That being said, once again, there is another argument that could be made. You could have a super rare card that almost never enters the market and that still does stay in collectors' collective consciousness. But usually there's a very specific reason for these kinds of cards to hold that kind of demand. For example, Michael Jordan's 1997 Precious Metal Gems card is a very short print that you almost never see anywhere, especially the green one out of 10. But there are two things that I think keep it extra relevant. One is that it's just simply become very iconic. Sometimes you can kind of foresee which cards will become iconic and sometimes you can't, but this card has become iconic based on the narratives that thrive among card collectors. And this iconicness of it will likely always be there just because it always has been there. But there's another factor here too that I think is at play that I don't think is talked about much. I think the fact that precious metal gems in general are not too rare overall actually helps Jordan's cards stay higher value. Why? While you may never see the Jordan green one with your own eyes, you'll likely see all sorts of other precious metal gems cards at other times. There were so many printed from other players in that year, 123 in that particular set, and others printed in tons of other sports and a bunch of other Marvel and other non-sports cards, that you can actually find PMG cards all over the place. Some are incredibly valuable and others just really aren't. But the fact that you can see some of them so often kind of keeps that Jordan in the minds of a lot of people, since it's like the pinnacle of the mountain. You can see the base of the mountain, and it makes you dream of the top. Now there's other short printed cards that don't have that, and over time they kind of fade from our collective consciousness. They're out there, they're valuable, but their demand on the market is very small because it's just not something people often even recall. If people can't see the base of the mountain, they forget the peak is out there somewhere. It just becomes a forgotten memory. I guess all this means that if you were to invest in one of the super high-end cards, I would tend to say that the really iconic ones would be the better way to go. The ones that have different factors that help it to remain in collectors' consciousnesses. Consciousnesses? Is that a word? If it's not truly iconic and it's also super rare and super expensive, then that may be the recipe for obscurity and may result in the inability to find a buyer, especially if the worldwide economy took some downturns. Again, that's not the recipe for a good long-term investment. Now, I've said kind of a lot in this video and kind of gone all over the place, but if I was to summarize what I'm trying to say, it's that I think mid-tier cards that are not super common, but also not so rare as to be obscure, are actually a better and safer investment, especially those that have real reason to be iconic. For example, though I personally would be super happy if I randomly pulled something like a Luka Doncic fast break bronze prism rookie numbered out of 20 from a pack, I would never choose to aim for that card as something to buy as a single card. Well, unless it was like a super ridiculous, unrealistic level good deal. There's nothing iconic about that specific card. It is one of a seemingly infinite number of different color parallels. There's nothing that makes this one stand out in any way that really says it'll mean much long term. And because of its rarity, it'd only have a very low number of people who could actually afford to buy it. So I'd very likely have to sell it way under its value would seemingly be, meaning its true value actually is much less than what it may seem at first. But on the other hand, if I saw a solid deal on the market to scoop up a Luka Doncic silver prism, I'd be much more likely to aim for that as a long-term investment, depending on the market conditions at that moment. It's not super rare, but it is less common than the base. It is a color parallel still, but it's not an annoying one like most of the other color parallels are, so it's likely to still be appreciated some years later once everyone finally realizes how annoying all of these color parallels are. It's likely to always have demand. It's likely to always have the ability to be sold. And this here is a big one. I would have the power in any transaction. If I didn't like the deal being offered to me, I could safely just say no and move on and look for a different buyer. There'd be plenty. With the fast break bronze prism out of 20, the buyer may really have the power in some ways, if I actually was motivated to move it. If I didn't sell it to this one interested party right now who is really offering me too little, who knows how long I'd have to wait to find another interested party who would offer me more. That would put me at a disadvantage and might end up resulting in me selling it for less than I would want to. That's not a good position to be in as an investor. Now again, if you just pulled this card from a pack, this is not the issue, as anything is a lot of profit and you could sell it for less than its value and still be super happy. But if you're actually investing in it, you're much less likely to want to sell it for under its market value. This kind of thought process makes me think that over time, the actual market value on some of these more obscure parallels will eventually decrease, as the only people selling them will be the ones who pulled them from packs originally, and they don't mind bringing the price down a bit if they only originally spent a couple of $100 in the box they pulled it from anyways, which could eventually bring the overall perceived value of that card down. Anyway, this video is just a bit of interesting rambling. I hope you enjoyed the mental journey. Please do subscribe to the channel for lots of sports card related content. Sometimes we go deep, sometimes we stay shallow. But anyway, check y'all next time. Peace.